What do you do when the weight of your father's legacy starts slipping through your hands like sand and no one around you seems to notice? Franklin Boyd stood silently in his top-floor office, a space that once pulsed with the quiet confidence of his father's vision. The windows stretched wide, offering a panoramic view of the city where he had scraped knees, kissed his first crush, and learned to ride a bike. This city was in his blood. And yet, the reflection staring back at him in the glass was tight-jawed, haunted. 14 stores. His father had built the first one in the late 80s with nothing but grit and a dream, and over time, transformed it into a respected chain of fast casual diners that spread across 3 states. It wasn't just a business. It was a story of resilience, of blue-collar ambition that turned into generational promise. When Franklin took over 3 years ago, he swore to himself and to the memory of his father that he wouldn't just keep the lights on, he'd keep the soul alive. But now the walls were whispering a different story. Complaints were pouring in. Staff turnover was at an all-time high. And then there was the Westbrook location. The store that had once led in customer satisfaction now sat at the bottom of every internal ranking. He'd asked the district manager about it the week before. Just a rough patch, they had said. New hires aren't sticking. We're working on it. The district manager had ushered them out. "Are you feeling sick?" But Franklin had heard that line too many times. It was corporate white noise now. So he made a choice that surprised even himself. If no one else could see the cracks forming, he would climb down and see them with his own eyes. No title, no safety net. He disguised himself, tucked his salt and pepper hair under a beanie, trimmed his beard to a tight, nondescript line, and wore clothes that smelled like second shifts and back kitchens. He became Rick. A nobody, a guy looking for work, the kind his company had forgotten how to care about. No one at Westbrook had ever met him before. Corporate rarely stepped foot in stores anymore. His father had died long before most of the current crew ever clocked in. On a gray, rain-slicked Monday morning just before 7 a.m., Franklin stepped into the diner not as its heir, but as a man searching for the truth, buried beneath grease stains and exhaustion. Blanson, the store manager, was already barking orders before the door had fully shut behind him. Tall, sharp-tongued, and moving with the frenetic energy of a man constantly playing defense, he barely spared Franklin a glance. "You the new guy?" Lance asked, tossing a stack of order slips on the counter. "Yeah, Rick," Franklin replied, "starting today." Lance didn't offer a handshake or even a nod. "Stick with Travis. He'll show you the ropes. Don't get in the way." And that was that. Franklin found himself trailing behind Travis, a lanky line cook with tired eyes and a voice so quiet it barely registered above the kitchen hum. They moved through morning prep like dancers in a routine choreographed by repetition and survival. Chop, wipe, stir, restock. Everything was done just fast enough to keep the place from falling apart. "3 called out this morning," Travis muttered, sliding a crate of lettuce into the fridge. "Is it until that normal?" Franklin asked, lifting a tray of eggs. Travis smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Nah, people just don't want to deal with this place. New hires last like 2 weeks, maybe." Franklin didn't reply. He just kept working, kept watching. By noon, the kitchen was in chaos. Orders stacked high like dominoes. Lance shouted louder and faster. Franklin pushed himself harder, sweat soaking through his collar. And that's when he noticed the kid. Couldn't have been more than 19. Thin, jittery. A crooked visor sat awkwardly on his head as he tried to balance a tray of dirty dishes with trembling hands. Every time he passed the line, one of the older guys, Jake, if Franklin remembered right, muttered something cruel under his breath. "Hey, princess, gonna break another plate today? Bet you cried last night washing aprons." The boy, Wyatt, Franklin would soon learn, never reacted, His head stayed down, shoulders hunched like he was trying to disappear. He just kept going, kept cleaning. Franklin leaned toward Travis. "What's his name?" "Wyatt. Just started last week." "What's his deal?" Travis hesitated, then shrugged. "Quiet, jumpy, bit off. Think he might be on the spectrum or something. Jake and the guys mess with him a lot." Franklin's stomach tightened. "And management just lets it happen?" Travis looked away. "We've all said something. Lance says Wyatt needs to toughen up." The words settled like lead in Franklin's chest. A storm of memory rose up. His father teaching him never to mistake silence for weakness, never to leave a good man behind. He kept watching, kept noticing. Later, Wyatt fumbled a tray of forks. The clatter echoed through the kitchen. Jake clapped sarcastically. "Way to go, champ. Maybe next time try using your hands." Wyatt winced, but didn't speak, just bent down and gathered the fallen silverware. And for the first time in a long while, Franklin felt something inside him snap, not in anger, but in painful recognition. This wasn't just a rough patch. This was rot, and it had been growing right under his nose. Wyatt's face flushed a deep, painful red as the clattering forks echoed around him like an accusation. He dropped to his knees, hands trembling, eyes locked on the ground. Shame rippled off him in waves. Franklin took a step forward, instinct urging him to intervene, but he stopped himself. Not yet. There was more he needed to see, more he had to understand before he made his move. Later that evening, long after the lunch rush had faded and most of the staff had clocked out, Franklin found Wyatt sitting alone behind the walk-in freezer. The cold air hummed around him, and his knees were tucked tightly to his chest, forehead resting against them. His hands shook slightly. The boy looked like a ghost, or someone trying to disappear into the shadows. "You okay?" Franklin asked. His voice softened to something warm, gentle. Wyatt startled, wiping at his eyes with the sleeve of his shirt. "Yeah, just tired." Franklin crouched beside him, his own body aching from the long day, but the ache inside his chest was sharper. "You handled yourself well today. That wasn't easy." Wyatt gave a faint, broken smile, the kind that tried to hold back the weight of something bigger. "Thanks. I'm trying. I really like working here. I don't get why they hate me." Franklin's jaw clenched. "They don't hate you," he said, carefully choosing his words. "Some people just push others down, so they don't have to face how small they feel inside." Wyatt looked up, his eyes watery but searching. "You really think that?" "I know it," Franklin said with quiet certainty. And in that moment, the final thread of hesitation snapped. He couldn't stand back anymore. He couldn't pretend the business still carried his father's values if he let this go on. That night, he checked into a cheap motel just down the road. The room smelled like mildew and old air conditioning, but he didn't care. He sat on the edge of the bed, pulled out a notebook, and began writing. Every name, every incident, every failure of leadership he'd witnessed over the past 2 days. And at the top of the page in bold letters, he wrote one name: Lance. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about decency, and come tomorrow, everything was going to change. Franklin arrived before sunrise, his back stiff from the motel bed, and his thoughts sharper than they had been in weeks. As he walked through the back door of the Westbrook diner, the now familiar tang of fryer grease and industrial cleaner hit him like a wall. The prep crew was already moving, mechanically, without spirit. They weren't working with pride. They were surviving. Travis handed him a hairnet without a word. Franklin took it, nodded, and got to work. For the first hour, the kitchen was quiet. Orders trickled in like early rain. Lance hadn't shown up yet, but the behavior was the same as yesterday. Wyatt stayed small and silent, always taking the worst tasks without complaint, scrubbing grime from under machines, hauling trash through the rain, cleaning the busted ice machine. Jake and Marco clearly saw him as the one they could dump on. Franklin watched, he absorbed, he documented in his mind. And he waited. Mid-morning, Lance arrived, sunglasses still on despite the thick gray clouds outside. He didn't acknowledge anyone, didn't say good morning, just scanned the room like a man checking inventory. "Where's Wyatt?" he asked, scrolling on his phone. "In the back," Marco replied. "Been there since 6. Lance didn't answer. He simply turned and headed down the hallway. Franklin followed, keeping just out of sight. "Hey!" Lance's voice snapped like a whip. "You mop this hallway?" Wyatt, holding a bucket, turned slowly. Yes. I just finished." Lance dragged his boot through a small puddle near the lockers. "Then why's it still slick?" "I think Wyatt started. "Don't think," Lance cut him off. "Clean it again, and if I catch you hiding behind the freezer again, I'll write you up. This isn't daycare." Wyatt swallowed hard and nodded, eyes cast down. Franklin had seen enough. He stepped back, his fists clenched tight, the rage cold and precise. This wasn't management. This was cruelty wearing a name tag. An hour later, during a lull, Franklin stepped outside and called his assistant from behind the dumpster alley. His voice was low but charged with quiet fury. "Can you look something up for me?" he asked. "Lance Holloway, store manager, Westbrook location. Any HR complaints?" There was a pause. 3 formal complaints in the last year, she said. 2 for hostile behavior. 1 for retaliation after scheduling changes. All closed, no disciplinary action. "Because I'm watching him create complaint number 4 right now," Franklin said. Then he hung up. He didn't need a policy manual to know what had to be done. Just after lunch, a school bus pulled in, and chaos followed. A rush of noisy teenagers flooded the front counter. Orders poured in. Franklin jumped to the register, Wyatt ran trays like a ghost trying to be helpful, and Jake manned the grill. Marco had vanished. "Where's Marco?" Franklin called out as he punched in another double cheeseburger. "Taking a break," someone muttered. Franklin's eyes narrowed. There were no breaks in the middle of a lunch rush. Not in his father's company, not on his watch. Not anymore. Jake didn't even look up when he spoke. "Taking a break." Franklin glanced at the clock. Marco had barely been on the floor for 90 minutes. Before he could say anything, a tray near the pickup counter slipped from Wyatt's grip. A few fries scattered across the floor. The sound was minor, but it struck like thunder in the tense kitchen air. Jake chuckled under his breath. "Guess gravity doesn't like you either." From across the kitchen, Lance's voice cut through. "Pick it up. We're not paying you to perform." He didn't even glance in Wyatt's direction. Wyatt's face turned crimson again and he dropped to his knees, quietly gathering the fries with shaking hands. Franklin's heart pounded as he stepped out from behind the counter. "I've got it," he said, crouching beside Wyatt. Wyatt tried to wave him off, embarrassed. "No, it's okay." Franklin shook his head gently. "It's not, but it will be." The moment passed quickly. The lunch crowd was still coming in. Franklin asked Travis to cover the counter for a few minutes and stepped outside. He needed air. He leaned against the rough brick wall behind the building, watching steam curl from the kitchen vents, and let his thoughts drift back. What would his father have done? Not this. Never this. His father would have walked through the kitchen like a storm, raised his voice, fired Lance on the spot, and made sure no one was ever treated like that again. But Franklin wanted more than a scene. He wanted a culture change. He wanted these employees, especially the ones quietly suffering, to see that someone was paying attention and that this shift wasn't a flash in the pan. It was permanent. When he stepped back inside, Wyatt was at the sink again, finishing a tray of dishes. His hands were red and raw from the hot water. "You got a second?" Franklin asked. Wyatt dried his hands and nodded. They stepped into the quiet hallway by the loading dock. Only the low hum of the freezer filled the space. "I want to ask you something," Franklin said, his tone soft. "You don't have to answer if you're not comfortable." Wyatt eyed him cautiously. "Morning, you stay here." Wyatt shifted, uncomfortable. "I need the job." "Yeah, but there are other jobs," Franklin replied gently. Wyatt paused, then lowered his voice. "This one's close to my apartment. I don't drive yet." He hesitated. Then, quietly, he added, "And I thought, maybe if I just worked harder, they'd stop treating me like I don't belong." That last sentence stuck in the air, heavy and real. Franklin nodded slowly. "You do belong. You show up early. You take on the jobs no one else wants. You care, and that matters." Wyatt didn't speak, but something in his expression shifted, uncertainty replaced with the beginnings of trust. Franklin checked his watch. "Your shift ends at 5. Can you stay a little late?" Wyatt blinked. "Why?" "I want you in the room when something happens." "What's happening?" Franklin offered a tight, steady nod. "Accountability." At 4:45, Franklin walked into the kitchen and raised his voice, not loud but firm. "Hey, can I get everyone's attention for a minute?" Conversations stopped. Pans paused mid-sizzle. Lance looked over from the service window, his expression sour. "Rick, what are you doing?" Franklin untied his apron, folded it, and set it on the counter. "My name's not Rick," he said clearly. "It's Franklin Boyd. I own this company." The room went utterly still. Lance's face drained of color. Jake's hand froze over a bucket. Wyatt, standing near the dish pit, stopped breathing. "I've spent the last 2 days working beside you," Franklin continued, "and what I've seen here is not what this company stands for." Lance took a step forward, trying to salvage the moment. "Mr. Boyd, I wish you had told me we could—" "No," Franklin interrupted. "You had your chance." His voice dropped, low and direct. "I've seen how you run this store. I've watched you mock employees, allow harassment, and create an environment where people are afraid to speak up. That ends today." Jake shifted uncomfortably. Marco appeared from the walk-in, confused. Franklin turned toward Wyatt. "You've been treated unfairly, and you deserve better. Starting today, you'll get it." Then he looked back at Lance. "You're done here. Clean out your things. HR will be in touch." Lance opened his mouth to argue, but no sound came. He closed it and walked out, silent. Franklin turned to Jake and Marco. "I suggest you both start rewriting the way you treat people, because I'll be watching, and I don't give second chances when it comes to respect." Neither man responded. Franklin turned to Travis. "You're stepping in as acting shift lead. HR will arrive tomorrow to conduct full interviews and assess this store. Until then, I expect respect, accountability, and professionalism." His tone hardened. "If that's a problem for anyone, now's your chance to leave." No one moved. Franklin walked back to Wyatt. "You sticking around?" Wyatt looked at the others. Then, with a faint but certain smile, he met Franklin's eyes. "Yeah, I think I will." Franklin nodded. "Good. Let's get back to work." The next morning, Franklin arrived at the Westbrook Diner at 7:00 a.m. sharp. This time he wore no disguise, just his usual press shirt, navy blazer, and company badge clipped to his belt. There was no need to hide anymore. No more watching from behind a mask. As he stepped through the front door, the shift was palpable. Heads turned, conversations shifted, the tone in the room changed, not out of fear, but out of recognition. The boss was here. But more importantly, the boss cared. Travis was already on the line, working the grill with quiet focus. He gave a nod in greeting. Wyatt was in the back, wiping down prep tables with efficient rhythm. He glanced up, caught Franklin's eye, and for the first time there was something new in his gaze. Assurance. Franklin walked past him and stepped into the small office at the back. The door was still slightly ajar. Inside, the desk remained cluttered with ignored paperwork and outdated schedules. Lance's legacy, if you could call it that. Franklin didn't touch a thing. He just sat and waited. At 8 o'clock I.m. sharp, Naomi Ray, the regional HR manager, stepped inside with her laptop and a tight bun in her hair. "Morning," she said, setting up. "Thanks for coming in early," Franklin replied. She raised an eyebrow. "You sounded serious." "I am," he said, because this wasn't just cleanup anymore. It was the beginning of something new. They spent the next 30 minutes buried in evidence. Naomi read through every detail Franklin had scribbled down in his notebook, notes from the floor, observations from the line, names, and timestamps. Alongside that were the official HR complaints she'd pulled from corporate systems. Most had been closed with barely more than a templated follow-up email. Was careful, Naomi murmured, scrolling through the digital records. Never quite enough to warrant a full investigation on their own, but taken together, this paints a very different picture. Franklin leaned forward. "I want in-person interviews today, not some off-site call, not a survey link emailed weeks later. I want these people heard, face to face, right here." Naomi met his eyes. "Understood." By 9, she had set up in the cramped break room behind the kitchen. Employees were brought in one at a time, starting with Travis. Meanwhile, Franklin stayed out on the floor. He didn't hover, didn't command. He observed. But what he saw left him with a quiet ache. Without Lance looming over everyone, the air was less tense. No yelling, no snapping orders. But that absence came with a price. Disarray. Orders got delayed. One double cheeseburger hit the window with only a single patty. A to-go bag sat untouched on the counter for 10 full minutes before anyone noticed. He watched Travis try to manage both the grill and the register, his shirt soaked through with sweat, jaw clenched with effort. Franklin finally stepped beside him. "You need a breather?" "I'm good," Travis replied quickly, but the exhaustion in his voice betrayed him. "Just short-staffed." "You've got a backup," Franklin reminded him. "Use him." Travis paused, then turned and called, "Wyatt, can you handle the register for a bit?" Wyatt stepped out from the back, looking unsure, like someone afraid of stepping into a spotlight they didn't ask for. But he nodded and moved into position. The first few transactions were slow. Wyatt double-checked every screen, triple-counted change. But he didn't mess up, he didn't falter. And as the minutes passed, something changed. One woman, holding her toddler at her hip, smiled at him as he handed over a receipt. "You're doing great, sweetheart." Wyatt blinked like he didn't know what to do with the kindness, but he smiled back, shaky but real. By 11:30, the lunch crowd was thick again. Franklin quietly stepped away from the kitchen and made his way back to the break room. Naomi was just finishing an interview with Amanda, one of the servers. "She confirmed everything you said," Naomi told him in a low voice. "And then some." Franklin's brows furrowed. Jake's been dumping grease trap duty on Wyatt. Marco's been skipping tasks and blaming it on other staff. Amanda reported it twice, no response. She said Lance brushed it off. Franklin's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. "Who's next?" "Wyatt." Wyatt was already waiting just outside the door. He stepped in quietly, eyes flickering between Naomi and Franklin before settling into the chair. Naomi offered a calm, reassuring smile. "You doing okay today?" Wyatt shrugged, voice low. "Better?" "Good. I want to ask a few things about your time working here. And you don't have to answer anything you're not comfortable with." Wyatt nodded. Okay? Naomi's voice stayed steady. Has anyone said or done anything to make you feel unsafe or singled out? Wyatt's hands twisted in his lap. He stared down at them. Yeah, a few times. Can you tell me what that looked like? Wyatt's voice trembled. Jake, he'd say stuff about the way I talk, that I don't get jokes. Called me Rain Man once. I didn't really get it, but it didn't feel good. Franklin felt the burn in his chest. His grip tightened on the doorframe. Naomi stayed calm. Did anyone else hear it? Marco laughed. Said I should be on the kids menu, not the line. Another time, they moved my apron. I thought I lost it, looked for it for 20 minutes. Travis found it under the fryer. Did you report this? Lance once, Wyatt whispered. He said I was being too sensitive, so I stopped saying anything. Franklin stepped forward. Wyatt looked up, startled. Franklin sat down next to Naomi. That won't happen again, he said firmly. Wyatt's eyes searched his, uncertain. I want to be very clear, Franklin continued. What you've described, none of it is acceptable. Not in my company. You've shown more professionalism in 2 days than some people have shown in months. You belong here, Wyatt, and we're going to make sure you're treated like it. Wyatt's throat bobbed as he swallowed. Thank you, he said, barely louder than a breath. Back in the kitchen, after the lunch rush died down, Franklin called the staff together. No shouting, just presence. His presence was enough. Jake and Marco stood off to one side. They exchanged a glance before Jake crossed his arms. What's this about? He asked, smug, challenging. Franklin locked eyes with him. You know exactly what it's about. Jake scoffed. If this is about that kid, we were just messing around. It's not serious. Franklin didn't raise his voice. His tone was sharp and quiet, like a blade. You targeted a co-worker. You insulted him, isolated him, and made every day harder for him. That's not joking. That's misconduct. Marco looked away. Jake said nothing. Franklin continued. This company was built by a man who believed in second chances, but not in cruelty. We are here to serve people, not break them. He took a step closer. If you want to be part of this team, that begins with respect. And if you can't offer that, then you don't belong here. No one argued. Franklin glanced at Wyatt, who stood quietly by the dish pit. Their eyes met, and for the first time, Wyatt didn't flinch. He stood a little straighter. Something had changed. Not just for Wyatt. For everyone. Marco looked like he wanted to vanish into the walls. Jake took one defiant step back, puffing himself up with empty bravado. But you can't just fire people based on hearsay. He spat. Franklin nodded slowly. You're right, I can't. Jake's smug expression flickered, confused for half a beat. But I'm not firing anyone based on hearsay, Franklin said, his voice calm but unyielding. I'm acting on multiple first-hand accounts, including your own behavior over the last 2 days, witnessed by me directly. His tone landed like a gavel. You're both done here. Jake's face flushed, dark red. You're out of your damn mind. No, Franklin replied, not moving an inch. I'm holding people accountable. Hand over your aprons. Naomi will provide your exit paperwork. Jake yanked off his apron and threw it on the floor like a tantrum. Marco removed his more quietly, eyes low. Neither said another word. They left through the rear exit, the silence behind them louder than any door slam. Franklin turned back to the crew gathered in the kitchen. This isn't about punishment. This is about setting a standard, drawing the line. He made sure his eyes met every single one of theirs. Everyone here deserves to work without fear, without games, and without being made to feel like they don't belong. If you're here to be part of a team, I will support you without hesitation. But if you're here to coast, mock, or drag others down, This is not your place." No one moved, no one objected, and no one left. Naomi quietly resumed collecting updated availability from the remaining crew, preparing to stabilize the store's battered foundation. Meanwhile, Franklin stepped away and made a call to the training division. He requested 2 rotating supervisors, temporary but present, to restore leadership while a permanent manager was sourced. He also requested a full training refresh to begin the following week, not optional. Topics: team building, conflict resolution, operational flow. But beneath the curriculum, the real goal was simple: teach them how to work together. As the day wound toward closing, Wyatt stepped out to take the trash to the back lot. Franklin followed at a distance. The sky was molten gold, the setting sun casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Wyatt didn't hear him at first, until Franklin spoke. "You did well in there." Wyatt paused mid-step, one hand on the dumpster lid. "I was nervous." "You didn't sound it." Wyatt gave a tiny shrug, then stared at the concrete like it held answers. "Am I really staying?" Franklin nodded. "If you want to." Wyatt let out a small breath, soft and steady. "I do." Franklin looked at the fading streaks of light in the sky. "Good. Because I think this place needs you more than it realizes." They stood in quiet for a moment. Not awkward, just honest. 2 men from different generations, sharing the weight of what it meant to care in a place that had forgotten how. Franklin gestured back toward the door. "Come on, let's finish the shift." Inside, the diner was humming again. Not flawless, but grounded. It was the beginning of something. Franklin knew there were still cracks to seal, systems to strengthen, communication to repair. But he also knew one thing. Something that was broken had begun to heal. By week's end, the Westbrook diner looked the same from the outside. Same flickering neon sign, same chipped curb near the entrance. But inside, the change was unmistakable. It wasn't a grand transformation. There were no banners or rebrands. It was quieter than that. Subtle. Steady. Franklin returned 3 times that week. No disguises. No fanfare. Just a clipboard, a careful eye, and a willingness to listen. He observed the workflow, noted inconsistencies in ticket times, saw the dish pit back up under pressure, but no one snapped anymore. No one muttered insults or passed the blame. Mistakes were owned, not weaponized. By Friday afternoon, Naomi returned with a short list of candidates for the store's new manager. She handed Franklin a manila folder in the back office. "I've screened for operations and leadership basics," she said, but these 3 stood out. Franklin flipped through the first 2. They looked fine, qualified, but vague, safe. Then he saw the 3rd. Ali Shaw, early 40s, former GM from a neighboring chain, left her last position voluntarily after refusing to cut employee hours during the holidays, even when corporate pushed her to do it. "She walked away from a promotion over ethics," Naomi added. "Twice." Franklin closed the folder. "Bring her in Monday. I want to meet her myself." That night, the crew finished closing just before 10. Wyatt was still wiping down the soda station when Franklin approached. "You're the last one here." Wyatt looked up, startled. "Oh, I was just finishing the drip tray. It leaks sometimes." "You always stay past your shift?" Wyatt hesitated. "I don't mind." That wasn't the question. Wyatt looked down. "Yeah, I stay late." Franklin gestured to the corner booth by the window. "Sit with me for a minute." They sat in the quiet hum of a near-empty diner. "He's been through more here than anyone should. But you stayed. Why?" Wyatt stared out the window, the parking lot lights buzzing like tired fireflies. "Because I kept thinking, maybe if I just stayed long enough, someone would notice." Franklin leaned back in the booth, his voice gentler now. "They did, and they won't forget." He paused, then added, I talked to Naomi. She's setting up a training path for team leads. It's optional, but I think you'd be a great fit. Wyatt's eyes widened. Me? You've already done the hard part. Showing up when it wasn't easy. The rest, we can teach. Wyatt lowered his eyes. I've never led anything. You don't have to be in charge to lead. You just have to care. You've got that already. And this time, Wyatt didn't flinch from the idea. He nodded, slowly, thoughtfully, letting it in. On Monday at 7 a.m., Callie Chavez walked into the Westbrook diner. Button-down shirt, comfortable sneakers, quiet confidence. She greeted each staff member by name. No clipboard, no lecture. She spent the day shadowing every role, dish, line, register, not to correct but to understand. By Wednesday, she had posted a new shift rotation. Fair, transparent. Streamlined deliveries so the morning crew wasn't buried during breakfast. Improved the inventory process. But more than that, she changed the tone. Check on your team before you check the clock, she told Travis during their afternoon walkthrough. If you want to keep people, they need to know you see them. Wyatt, now in week 2 of his training, shadowed her every day. He was quiet but sharp. He watched how she prevented tension before it sparked, how she thanked people by name, how she corrected without belittling. Friday afternoon, Franklin returned one last time. No blazer, no badge, just jeans and a company polo. He took his usual booth, watching the floor. Wyatt worked the register, more confident now. Travis directed the line with ease. Callie emerged from the back, towel in hand, and stopped beside Franklin. You built something solid here, he said. She shook her head. I didn't build it. I just cleared the space for it to grow. Franklin nodded. Wyatt's got a good eye. I hear you're pushing him to take on inventory. Hesitated, but I think he'll take it. He will, Franklin said. He just doesn't know it yet. Callie smiled faintly. He's earned it. Franklin stood and stretched. I won't be back for a while, not because I don't care, but because I trust what's here now. Callie nodded. We'll keep it straight. On his way out, Franklin stopped at the counter, waiting for Wyatt to finish with a customer. You remember what you told me about staying until someone noticed? Wyatt looked up, unsure. Well, Franklin said, they noticed. But don't wait for that again. If something's wrong, speak. Nobody grows in silence. Wyatt nodded. Not quick. Not anxious. Just steady. Franklin patted his shoulder, turned, and walked out. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot. The neon buzzed behind him. Same old diner. Same broken pavement. But it felt different now. He slid into his car, rolled the window down, and watched the doors swing open as 2 more customers stepped inside. This company hadn't just avoided disaster. It had found its heart again, through a quiet kid who refused to give up, through a leader who listened before acting, and through a decision to face the truth head-on, no matter how uncomfortable. And for the first time in a long time, Franklin knew this change would last.